The leader has not yet arrived. Please continue to hold for the call to begin.
Okay, hi everyone. This is Melissa Potson, your community manager. Thank you for joining today. Everyone's line has been automatically placed on mute. This is a very casual event, so by all means you can hit #6 to unmute really at any time during the presentation. Michael Boehm is here today to give you a great presentation on SOI concepts. This is part 1 in a series of events that we will continue to do for you on this topic. So we want this to be an interactive session. So #6 if you want to ask a question at any time. You can also use the Q&A panel. I pass to you, Michael. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa, for the introduction. For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Michael Böhm. I'm working for CA in Germany. I'm a member of the CA Engineering Services team, also called SWAT team, with a special area of SOI, and it's my pleasure to present one of these technical sessions again. So we had a series already, and we have a long list of sessions to go. So today we have one area called SOI concepts. But I want to pass back quickly to Melissa. You said you have one slide which you wanted to present first. So
thank you. Thank you. We've been running so many events in the communities in the past couple weeks, really months. So if you're not familiar, you can go out and to the community and look at our replays. We did an event yesterday on operationalizing your virtual network. It was a great presentation. We had Neve Cahill present to the community on getting to the next level with SDN NFV. That's the link to watch the replay. And then Kieran just gave a great presentation about Spectrum UIM integration. So if you want to get out to the community and watch those replays, you can do so, and there's also many other events. And then on September 27th, if you're planning to go to World or already registered to go to World, you don't want to miss on the event we're having on the 27th, because it will give you some great insights into some specific technical tracks that you might want to pay attention to. So thank you, Michael.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. So let's start with this presentation. As Melissa mentioned already, this should be as interactive as possible. So currently everybody is on mute, but if you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself and ask your question in context. In most cases, it only makes sense to ask a question in context. If you ask it 10 minutes later, we have to draw back everything or roll back everything and then start from that point again. So if you feel there's something which is not clear, what I intend to do today is talk about a few basic concepts and terminology of SOI. I hope most of you are familiar with this. I just want to reiterate these topics, especially talking about the infrastructure alert and the configuration item, then the next level, what SOI is designed for, services and service alerts. I want to discuss how impact is calculated and why is this so different compared to fault management. I want to finally show some of these topics, depending on questions as well, on scenarios which we can discuss on a live demo, and then we will have plenty of time for Q&A. Somebody has some background noise. Would you mind muting your lines? Okay, this sounds better now. Good, so let's start. what we all know about, most of us are coming from the area of fault management. We are working with alerts, sometimes also called events. I'll explain a little bit in a minute where I see the major difference here. What we talk about here in the context of SOI, we call this an infrastructure alert. This is something what a domain manager, something like Spectrum, like URM, like APM, like third parties, SCOM, or other monitoring tools detect and report about a specific object they monitor. This can be a fault condition or something, it doesn't have to be a fault, but something which is important to notice. And this is the thing I would like to highlight a little bit here. What SOI is supposed to show are actionable events. This is what we call alert. There may be hundreds of messages on your consoles, but most of them are either only of interest because you want to log them, but nobody is doing something with that message. They're just they're scrolling through the console due to logging purposes. But what we really try to achieve with SOI is to only capture the things where somebody has to work on. Create a ticket, an operator has to do something, send an email about something, or things like that. So the really important things. And this is what SOI is designed for. I'll go a little bit more into detail in the services context later in this presentation. From the SOI perspective, we have a very basic concept, and this is every alert has to be in the context of a CI. In a lot of monitoring tools, you just care about a message. This is what we call fault management. There's a message on the console, and then you figure out what it says. This is especially true, for example, when you work with the SNMP connector. It just sends you a message. It doesn't really know something about a CI, which is in background, but for SOI, it is very important that we always have a CI which we can, to which we can connect this alert. But what is a CI really? And this is what I try to explain here. For most domain managers, for most monitoring tools, a CI is something like a device, some physical hardware, a server, a switch, a router, some network device, something on the device level. You can see here from the screen capture, this is something from URM. I will show this later as well in my demo. So URM has the context of device level objects, and this is what you see on the right side of my screen capture. Here, this is the representation in SOI. We go to the device level object. But especially when you talk about services, which I'll cover in the next slide, we are more or also interested in granular objects. And this is where it can be sometimes tricky. This is the job of the connectors to derive this information from the original source. In the example of UIM, there is a table with individual objects. They're also called configuration items in this table. But they are not really entities which you have as individual objects in the monitoring tool, like something where you can click on or get properties. This is for UIM, it is somewhere in the database. For other monitoring tools, you don't even have this level. Everything, when there's a message, is attached to a device level object. And this is where we, as I said, sometimes need some methods, some intelligence to figure out what is the real low-level object where this alert belongs to. It can be a database, it can be a file, or it can be an application. And this is what we are really interested in, talking about services, in the context of services. So with SOI, we want to look one level deeper. Please keep this in mind, especially when considering what type of messages do you have on the original domain manager. Do they all belong to a device level object? especially when you talk about synchronization of information, like putting a device into maintenance. This is possible in most cases only on the device level object on a domain manager. But in SOI, as we have granular objects there, you can also put a granular object in SOI into maintenance mode. But when you now think there is no granular CI on the domain manager, there's nothing which you can synchronize back, because you put a file into maintenance mode in SOI. Possibly you can't put this file, because it doesn't even exist on the domain manager, into maintenance. So these are all the things which play a role talking about the bidirectional integration of tools into SOI. With SOI, we always try to achieve to go to some kind of low-level objects. Not all. There are also some other connectors or scenarios where we get, I wouldn't say millions, but hundreds of low-level objects which don't really make any sense. We are working on that, making the connectors more intelligent, that you can even configure that, like the connector. You can configure very granular of which CIs you want to create as granular objects. Everything else will be connected to the device level object. So this is a very basic concept for SOI you have to think of, especially when we now go to the next level, which is a service. What is a service? There are different types of services. One type, which most of us normally start with, are so-called IT services or topology-based services. You redraw in SOI what a domain manager, something like Spectrum, knows already, like this server is connected to this switch and this switch is connected to that router. This is a topology layout. On the right side of my screen capture, you can see something like servers with granular objects below. This is also kind of IT service. These are granular objects, children of the servers. But this is not what we're aiming for. For business services, you see a representation on the left side of my screen capture. This is more the application view. Especially when you integrate APM, you normally start with this level. Here you can see you have an application on top, and then you configure or you create your service in a way that you always think about which objects, which other objects, devices, services, sub-services, whatever, do I need for this application to run. In this case, I drew a scenario of this application depends on a database, and it depends on some kind of file system, or directly a file. These two things, again, the database and the file, are running on a server. And just to make this picture a little bit bigger, I added the switch where this server is connected to. But you see, this is the lowest level now. I'm always starting from the application point of view, and sometimes I'm not even interested in the device levels themselves. I'm planning to give another presentation in the future about different strategies for service modeling. This will also be possibly one of the CA World presentations, but I'm planning in the SOI community as well to provide this information. So what can I do to provide good services? What are different ways to create services? So I don't want to go into details here now. But this is what we have to think about, especially when we talk about business services. You now see why we are interested in the granular objects and not necessarily about the device level objects. Then, when we have created a service, we create a service alert, or SOI creates a service alert. This means something like the service is degraded. It gives us information about all the rules, about all the services, and tells us if the services are still fine, and depending on the rules we have defined, there might not be any impact towards the service even if there's a failure. So this is what I want to show next, the very basic concept of SOI, of impact calculation. As I said, most of us, me included, we are coming from fault management, and we are used to see something. If a child is read, then this has to propagate up to the parent. I want to expand the parent. If that gets read, I want to follow the entire path down to the child which caused this problem. This is typical for fault management. What we do in service management, we create different rules that finally specify how much impact does this fault condition have towards my service. Not necessarily it is a one-to-one mapping. As you can see on the right side of my screen capture, you see it's always the same fault condition. Two servers are critical, but due to some rules I've defined here in the screen captures, and I'll show them later in my presentation, you can decide that this situation has different types of impacts towards the service. You see the condition itself, the fault condition or fault situation, two servers are critical, is always the same. So from a fault management point of view, we will have two messages on the screen showing us there are two critical messages, two servers are in critical mode, but depending on what else we have to work on, SOI will give us some hints of which problem to work first on. I will show this in my demo. I have a scenario there where I can show not always the red one is the problem you have to work first. Depending if you create proper rules for your services. This can take a while to prepare them properly, but once you did this, you will have a lot of benefit of deciding which problems to work first on. How is this impact calculated? It is what some monitoring tools call weighted severity. We have a severity, and this is the original mapping of the domain manager. So, which means if the domain manager said this object is in critical, then under normal circumstances, this object is also in a critical state in SOI. Unless you have decided in some policies to modify that, or the domain manager doesn't have the steady, minor, major, critical, some work with warning and critical, then in the connectors, this will be mapped to either of these states here, minor, major, critical. For example, traps, they normally have just a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 10 or whatever. And then in the code, it is decided of what severity level this is mapped to. But this is the original information from the domain manager. But now this is not passed through to the top level automatically. We have now one more factor, and it's really a factor from the mathematical point of view. This is the significance of an object. Every object, when you create a service, has a significance, and this tells the system how important this object is related to the business service. You might have an error condition on your screen that says server X is down. But if you look at your business service, this server is down, but it is part of a 5 web server cluster. If one server is down, we don't really care. For sure, somebody has to work on that, but 4 servers are still running fine, so my service stays green. You can set up rules like this. It is not that this fault condition of down is propagated up to the top level. This is what SOI is used for, to create all these rules. And especially, and this is what I played with to create these 3 screen captures, I gave the objects different significance levels to show the final impact towards the service can be different, although I have exactly the same problem condition. So if I now multiply these 2 values, severity multiplied by significance, severity ranges from 0 to 4, significance is a value from 1 to 10. we are coming up with a final value of ranging from 0 to 40. And you can see here the impact towards the service is now also classified in these 5 levels, always ranging in these 10th areas, 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30. This is how it is calculated. So this is what your final impact towards the service will be. You can calculate this from the bottom up. So this is one of the very important things to understand. SOI is not working with the severity like most of us are used for fault management tools. It is working with the impact, which is kind of weighted severity. Before I go into the presentation mode to show some of the things which I have explained so far, I always know showing interactively is much better. Are there any questions up to this point about these concepts? Then please unmute your line or use the Q&A session or the chat.
#6 to unmute.
So I'll just wait a short moment to see if somebody is unmuting, asking a question. Regarding impact calculation, there are much more scenarios. I think I can talk 2 hours only about this topic, how impact is calculated. I'm giving the basics here for the general understanding of why SOI is different towards a fault management or compared with a fault management system. But as I said, there are much more complex scenarios which you can create or things you have to consider when calculating this. One of the things which came up recently, which I might answer here again, it was on the community, I think, as well. There's nothing like adding up impact values. It is always the most critical one is propagated upwards. So if, let's say, demo server S1 is creating an impact of 3 and server 2 is creating an impact of 5, 5 will be propagated. It is not that you add up 5 plus 3 makes 8. There's a reason for that, and this was discussed as well. So because some people, especially, this is the way in fault management, adding up problems, SOI is trying to point you to the worst case, what you should fix first. And this is what I would like to show in my demonstration as well. As there are no questions up to this point, I'm switching over now to my presentation. Let me share my screen. Melissa, as you're the only one being unmuted, can you see my screen?
I can. You're good.
Oh, okay, thank you. So I want to quickly go over the same things now on my system to show what I've explained earlier. Let's even start from the UIM system. As you can see here on UIM, we have lots of messages on the console. Here on the infrastructure manager, it even looks worse. We have 24 messages here on this screen. When I look at the portal view, you see they are always in context of a server. In this case, yeah, a server, so advice level object. Although some of them are related to a log file, some are related to a database. UIM only knows the concept of device level objects. This is what all the alerts are attached to. In the connector code, we are going one level deeper. Just to show you one quick view here, there is in the database itself, we have a table called configuration item, and this is where we have all these metrics as individual items. So the connector code is trying to create granular objects out of this to make it more intelligent on the SOI side. When we look at these messages now on the SOI side, you see these are all the messages coming from UIN. And you can already see here now, so when you look at the class, we quickly sort by class, you see there are only a few computer systems, but some objects are files. There's a generic IP, there's a database. This is something where I have an error in my code. I prepared something today, but it didn't work properly. So this is one of the things where CI couldn't be created properly. I still get the message on the console, but this is the typical scenario. So I don't mind showing this here. As I said, every alert has to be attached to a proper CI in SOI. This is exactly this example. What happens, I get an alert on the console, but SOI doesn't know which CI to attach this object to. So something went wrong during the entire process. I was playing with this, but I left it on the console just to show this. So from this point of view, we do pure fault management. We see here all the messages are coming up. You can sort them whatever you like by severity. So people think all these red ones are the most important ones to work on, or by other areas, whatever you like. So this is typical fault management. But when I now go to the level of service management, I created some scenarios here which highlight some of the things I've explained before. For example, this is a typical IT service. It gives, this is where I took the screen capture from as well. So this is some servers monitored by UIM, and all the, or some of them, I removed some of them to keep the view in a visible format. So some of the children, and you see in a lot of cases, the children have some problems, but the devices themselves are fine, or they only run with minor problems. And now the concept is shown here as well in a very nice way. What does impact mean? I said everybody of us tends to work on all the red messages first. But due to the impact calculation, every object has a significance, and I'll show that in a different slide in a minute. You see, SOI even tries to point us to the most critical problem, which is when I follow this path, this database. So the rules which are defined in this service, everything is here the default. I didn't modify anything in this screen here in this service. So already by the default values, every object has a default significance unless you change it. You see, SOI knows this object here, this database has a problem, and if you fix that, it is currently the most disturbing thing regarding availability of your service. It even overrules that a server might be in a critical state, or this file system might be a critical state. Let me try to clean that. And then we'll see SOI is recalculating. Once this is cleared, it will recalculate all the impacts. And now it points me to two things. Okay, in this case, both are these critical messages because I didn't modify anything regarding significance. But you see they are having the same impact. So you have two areas, again, to work on now. But this is how you can go through in a service and tell your operations people, this is the most thing you should take care of. Don't always look at only the critical messages or even the down message. Look at SOI in the context of the business service. And where does SOI point you to? As I said, it takes a long while to create the concepts properly I did this with one customer, spending 3 to 5 days workshops for every individual service to make sure we capture all the objects which are monitored, we capture all the fault conditions, we decide what is important. This is the most important thing in SOI if you want to work with real business services. I have another business service created, like I said before. Let's make this a little bit bigger for you, just that you see it better. So this is a typical scenario. Like I said, I have an application. Please don't look at any names here. I just clicked some objects. I only have a very small environment, so I only need some objects to play with. So it doesn't really make any technical sense. I just want to highlight what I'm doing here. So I have an application here. This depends on a file system and on a database, which are both running on a server. So you see here as well, the server seems to have a problem, but my application is still in a running state. The service is defined to have a slight impact due to this. The database is fine, the file system is fine, but there seem to be some problems on the server. And network connectivity is fine as well. So all this related to the service seems to be in a fine condition, that we only have a slight degradation in the service now. Showing you the different effects of impact calculation. What I have prepared here for you is this scenario. I have the 3 servers, and let me go into edit mode of this. There you can see the values. Currently, all the servers have the same significance value of 10. I made it 10 here by default for easy calculation, but now I want to change this to show you some effects. Like I'm setting this to 1, I'm setting this to 5, and I'm leaving this server to 10. Maybe this is my primary server, then I have a backup server and something which is just to keep alive if everything breaks. So then we want to see what the impact is now. So I can now create some fault conditions. I have a little utility doing that. I will set all the servers into the same critical condition. And then we will see what will happen. Oh, where am I? You see all 3 are in critical state. They even have the exact same message that this server has a problem. But you see the so-called ant trail, the most critical path, is going to this server, because it has the highest impact value calculated. When I now put this server in a lower criticality value, you will see that it will still impact the servers the most, because the calculation, the number is still the top one. You see it has significance 20, minus state is 10. I already multiplied in my head, sorry. So it has significance of 10 multiplied with 2, which is the major. So the value is 20, and this is still propagated. So although this server only has a major problem, it is still the most critical one to get fixed. And even if I put it to a minor one, it will still, oh no, now this one takes effect because this is 5. You see now this one takes over. This is in a minor condition. This one has significance 5, critical is 3, so now this one has the impact, 15. This is what you can play with, and I totally agree because I know many customers have done this. So how difficult it is to create the proper rules. My recommendation is first use the out-of-the-box default values and see if everything works like you expected. If not, then you start modifying these values and start playing with it. But this is what SOI is designed for, to create things like this, to calculate different impact values depending on the scenarios you have, so that not every alert is immediately propagated to the top level and everything looks to be down if one of the objects is down. So I can even try that, what I just said. That's server 2. Let's put that in a down condition. We'll see even if an object, it will go to down in a second. Then still, this one in the critical condition is the one impacting my service the most, so you should still work on that server to get that fixed and not immediately jump on a down message in your console. This is what SOI is all about, to guide you in which problems to work first on. It requires lots of input, lots of thoughts, but this is the basic concept of what the benefit is of having SOI with this impact calculation. As I said, you can set up many, many more rules. This is the absolute basic I've shown here. You can set up cluster rules, just because I see it here, like depending on what happens here, different scenarios, I've created a rule for that. How is my service impacted depending on what is going on with my 3 servers here in the cluster. But this is the next level already, which I don't want to go in this presentation. So this is all I intended to demonstrate. Now here on my environment, I now want to go back to the presentation and open up to questions.
You have one already in the Q&A panel.
I'm just going through, as I can't present and read questions and especially answer them in background. So now we are open up for questions on either medium. Either you unmute your line and ask it, otherwise I will go through it here, answering the questions within the Q&A session. First question I see here is from Bernard. Can the underlying CIs be automatically updated if the service relies on something like Docker containers, which might be dynamically spun up and down based on load utilization? The answer to that is yes, we can do that if you use something like dynamic discovery policies. This is something I tend to show in one of the later presentations. We're planning an entire presentation about that, how to use dynamic discovery policies. You can set up rules of what to include in a service, depending on some properties, names, stati, or whatever property you can make use of. You can say, include this. I've shown this in some presentations, like I have a server farm, and I know on each of these servers there's a database running, but I don't want to model this manually. So the system is intelligent enough to have the property on every database object, what is my parent, what is my device name. So we set up a rule in the discovery policy. That's one rule. It says for every database, for every device level object I have in my service, find the related database and automatically attach it. Then you will see the service automatically updating as well if something changes. If you spin up a new database server or a new database on one of the servers, it will automatically be published in the service and also be deleted again once the condition is not true anymore. It's always a question of refresh periods, and so if you think there are scenarios like every second something changes, we are just discussing this regarding cloud environments. Especially nowadays in cloud environments, applications are running all over instance is spin up here, 2 seconds later it's running somewhere else, and so this makes it nearly impossible for SOI to keep up to date. Once you have the screen, it's not valid anymore. So you have to think about this as well, what makes sense to draw in a service. But to answer that question, yes, we have dynamic discovery service policies. The next question from Dan: if maintenance mode is set for a CI and alerts for that CI are not seen in the console, so no escalation action is taken, once the CI comes out of the maintenance mode, the non-cleared alert appears and the escalate occurs. Is there a way to clear the alert before taken out of maintenance mode? This is a tricky situation because it depends on where you set the object into maintenance mode and how the condition is what condition we have when we end the maintenance mode. Normally, I would expect when maintenance mode is over that all errors are cleared. If there are still errors after maintenance mode, then for sure you have to act, which means this is why in this case it automatically comes back and then all escalations trigger, because there still seems to be a problem after maintenance. I know there are scenarios like SNMP based. They only say this has a problem. There is never a clear. So you might have to clear that during maintenance. It is also a question of how you configure. Let me quickly switch back to share my environment to show you some configuration possibilities for this scenario. They are on different levels. The most important one is in the global settings, where you say, shall the maintenance setting be propagated from a domain manager at all? Do we want to have impact propagated even if the object is not in maintenance mode? So there are several settings here which you can configure. On escalation policies, you can configure if they should be run. And most important, because sometimes you only see, you only suppress the messages. This is what happens in some domain managers. You think the message is not there, but when you look into the system, it's only a filter which by default is active, like I've deactivated it here. So hide alerts for services and infrastructure items that are currently in maintenance. If I click this, it looks like there is no such alert, but in reality, I've only hidden it in the console. I've applied a filter. So, and this is the default setting. So like here, I've deactivated that now, which means I will always see the alerts even if they are in maintenance. There are many configuration possibilities, so it is a little bit tricky to answer this with a yes or no. So, but it depends on the scenario. So then after the next follow-up question on that, maintenance mode set in SOI, but the fault errors are not cleared with SNMP traps, the scenario I mentioned as well. So we need to clear these manually at times. Yes, this is correct. And I also know this is one of the scenarios which currently doesn't work properly, to set an escalation policy for everything, clearing all the alerts which are in maintenance. This is one of the missing features. It is definitely on the roadmap for one of the next releases, so that you can set escalation policies to clear alerts. We're thinking of the scenario creating a special alert queue based on all the objects or all the alerts of objects which are in maintenance mode and automatically clear them. This is currently not working because we are missing some properties in the rules which you can set up, but this is being fixed soon. We are aware of that. It's on the roadmap. But currently, I think it's more or less a manual action. So, but as I said, in this case, when you have a SNMP trap and that object is in maintenance mode, I assume you have this filter active, that it looks like the alert is not on the console and it only comes back when maintenance mode is over. But if you clear this filter, you will see this alert should be on the console because there is no new trap coming after the object is in maintenance, released from maintenance. That's the SOI functionality. It is still the same trap which came in previously, so it must be in the system already. It's only hidden due to this setting. Any other questions? I don't see anything in the Q&A or chat at the moment. Anybody wants to ask something on the phone line? Unmute your phone, please.
Just a final reminder, #6 to unmute.
As normal, if something comes up later, you can always contact me also directly or via the SOI community.
Absolutely. So I think we can close it up. Thank you for joining today. We will post a copy of the replay to the community, and you should pay attention to upcoming events. We'll publish that within the next week or so, and we'll work on getting some events published. Of course, I spoke already about the CA World event that's coming up on the 27th. That's in the IM community. You can go out there to register. And I think that's it. Any final thoughts, Michael? Other than that, we can close it up.
No, thank you for attending the session. And as I said, if there are any follow-up questions, please feel free to contact me directly.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And Michael, thank you. Okay, take care, everyone. Thank you for joining. Bye now.
Bye.